Here are several mistakes that I've made over the last 1,100 hours of flying that you absolutely can avoid if you'll just implement the stuff that you're about to hear. The first thing I would go back and tell myself is this: safety slips in small stages. It's kind of become a mantra for me on the channel here, and it's because of the times that I've gotten into situations that I didn't like in the air. It's been my own fault, but more importantly, it's been the result of several small bad decisions that are adding up. So sometimes you'll read an accident report that's like, a guy was flying at night in the mountains, in thunderstorms, in IFR, over gross weight and low on fuel, and he crashed in the side of a mountain and died. It's tragic, it does happen, and I'm not at all making light of that, because any fatality anywhere is a tragedy. But just for like the sake of kind of learning here, my honest reaction, if I'm just being like brutally honest, to reading those kinds of situations is like, how did that happen? Like, wasn't that so obvious that all those risk factors were in play? Like, don't do this, don't go fly. And I've really been humbled in this way, if I'm being honest, and I think it's a good teaching moment for myself and hopefully for you, is that that's not how it's going to play out. It's not going to be like, it's nighttime, it's thunderstorming outside, and it's definitely IFR, and honey, you wanna go fly? Like, that's how I think it plays out, and it's totally not. It happens in much smaller, tempting decision after decision to get you into that spot. And I can give you a perfect example of this. The time that I've probably been most scared in the cockpit, it hasn't happened very many times, but this is the one that sticks out to me. This is far enough in my rear view mirror now where I can talk about it objectively. And so just as a quick side note, I wanna encourage you that if you have had or will have a time that you're kind of scared in the cockpit or something happened and it freaked you out, like, I promise with time it is going to get better, because there was like a period of time where I couldn't even think about this. Like, I filmed it at the time and I deleted the footage immediately because I didn't even want to relive it. I was scared. And so I would encourage you, like, time will help. And I want you to tell somebody about it. And if you do those things, eventually it's going to be something you can look back and learn from, instead of it just being something that's like, oh my gosh, that freaked me out, I'm so ashamed, I don't want to tell anybody. Like, that is where healing is. So that's where I'm at with this thing, so I can talk about it objectively. So I was in the mountains. It wasn't night and thunderstorming, but I was in the mountains, and I ended up being like too high, way too fast on an approach. And I was not comfortable with the go around. I didn't even really brief the go around procedure. I was at Johnson Creek in Idaho, so like real steep mountains on each side going into this place. And I felt way committed to the approach, and I didn't even think I was gonna be able to stop on the runway because I was going so fast. And I was able to stop, but I shut down and I turned the airplane off, and I just like, what did I just do? That really scared me. And in retrospect, it's like, this is the perfect example of like, well, duh, you don't want to be, too high, too fast in the mountains. But that's not what presented itself. The way it happened was I didn't see the runway until like I was like right over it. It's kind of hard to see. And then I thought, well, I'll just keep going. I'll keep pressing on. I can start descending. And then there was some other people coming into the pattern. I thought, well, I'll just be respectful of them. I'll just try to do a short approach, no big deal, and get out of the way. So I kept pushing. So now I'm like too high, too fast, steep, trying to make a tight approach. And then I was kind of low, and I was like, oh, I'm getting kind of low here. I don't really want to try to go around because I'm not really sure what's down the valley and stuff like that. So then I felt committed to the approach. And then all of those things added, like none of those decisions would have been terrible in their own way, but once you add them up, turned into a bad deal. That's how it's going to present itself in your flying. It's not going to be some big, hairy, ugly decision. It's going to be one little thing like, let's keep going, let's push it. Oh, that's okay, let's keep pushing it, let's push it. So safety slips in small stages, don't ever forget it. And that leads into the next point, which is to never let anyone else rush you. That time in the mountains, I let the other formation flight kind of rush me when I should have just circled the airport, let them land, and established a more stabilized approach. They weren't actually rushing me, but I ended up allowing them to kind of rush me because I was trying to stay out of their way. So usually whenever you rush something, it's a bad idea. So if you feel yourself speeding up, find a way out, just find a way to stop yourself and try again, go around, take a minute, do whatever you have to do to not feel rushed. And speaking of not rushing through things, the next thing that can get you hurt is the checklist, or forgetting to use it, really. And there are two sneaky parts of the checklist. Like I feel like I'm pretty disciplined about using the checklist, but there's two parts that I have missed, and two really important examples come to mind that is going to be easy for you to do. And the first is looking at the fuel selector. So for me in my 182, it's really easy to assume that fuel is on both because it's always on both, and no one else has flown it since I've flown it because I own it. I'm the only one who flies it. But there was one time coming out of maintenance when they had switched the fuel tank over to the left or the right. I don't remember which one, it doesn't matter, but it wasn't on both. And I didn't realize that until I landed after the flight. And that freaked me out because, like, luckily it wasn't a long cross country or something, so I didn't run that tank dry. But if I had been going somewhere, I very easily could have run that tank dry, which if I was in cruise, okay, hopefully I would have figured that out. But what if that happened while I was on short final or something? Like, it could have happened at a really inopportune moment just because I didn't look at it. And I went through the checklist, I was using the checklist, but it was one of those things where I saw, okay, yeah, fuel's on both. Fuel's always on both. Like, I haven't touched it, it's always there. And so you just have to take a second to like, and I'm guilty of this, as evidenced by this story of like, you'll read the item and you're like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that because I've always done that, or that's in the same place I left it. But like, literally just take it'll take a 1 second to just say fuel selector on both. Cool, I look down there, it's on both, move on to the next one. You just have to slow down, don't rush yourself. And the second sneaky item is the circuit breakers. Now, you probably didn't pop any circuit breakers the last time you flew, but if the plane was in the shop, they very well could have pulled a circuit breaker and not pushed it back in. And I had this happen to me while I was in Kodiak 100 training a little while back. They have a full motion sim there. I was on like the 3rd day of sim training, and all of the circuit breakers are on this huge stack. And they're kind of hard, the very bottom row is kind of hard to get to. So I was like checking circuit breakers, part of my like pre-flight checklist and stuff. And then I frankly didn't check the very bottom row because I was just lazy. And I thought, well, they were all in the last 2 flights I did. Why wouldn't they be in now? Like, I check them, we're fine, we're in a simulator, whatever. And sure enough, that was the time that the sim instructor got in there before me and pulled one of the circuit breakers on the bottom row that led to some problems in the startup sequence. And he's like, huh, did you check the circuit breakers? And I was like, yeah. And he said, did you check all of them? And I go, no. He said, well, you better do that. And so it's really easy to assume like, oh, my circuit breakers are in. I've not pulled one. But like someone could have, or the shop could have, or whatever. So just because you think it's where you left it, it might not be where you left it. And so when it says that on the checklist, like, don't just assume like, oh, circuit breaker's good. It's kind of like the fuel selector. Like, actually just take a freaking second and think about it. And I'm guilty of that. I don't want you to be guilty of that. Another mistake I've struggled with a lot is getting rusty on things because I only memorized it for a test, but then just kind of lost it in my long-term memory. My favorite instructor of all time told me this, and it really changed the way I have approached training. It was during a flight review one time, and I was kind of having a hard time with the, not a hard time, but I was having to look a lot of stuff up in the ground section, and I was discouraged. I was like, man, like, you have all this stuff memorized. Like, how do you do it? And I'll never forget what he told me. He just looked at me and goes, it's simple. Aviation is a new language, and you just have to become fluent in it. And that word fluency really stuck with me. I mean, I've got my private, commercial, multi-commercial, instrument rating, seaplane rating, gotten checked out in turboprop, got my tail wheel endorsement. And I'm not saying any of that to brag. In fact, it's the opposite. I'm saying I've gone through all those different training experiences and check rides and stuff, and I still get really nervous for check rides and for flight reviews. And I think a lot of it is because of this. It's that I've memorized a lot of things for tests and I've been around this stuff a lot, but I don't know that I would say I'm actually fluent in all of it. And there's a big difference. So for over the last year, I have been working on my own set of study flashcards to really try to like solve this fluency problem. I think you can relate to this. Like, aviation is just really intimidating, mainly because of the volume of knowledge you have to have. There's like a few concepts that are maybe more challenging than others. Generally speaking, it's not that hard. There's just like a ton you have to memorize. And it's really hard to really commit that to long-term memory. And so flashcards are one of the best ways. It's like tried and true, it's timeless, to memorize stuff. And I wanted to build something that I could use for like the next 30 years to just maintain my fluency, or to like get fluent and then stay fluent. So I didn't want just like little scratch cards or whatever. Like, I wanted to build something that I was really proud of, that I would use, that I think other people could use, that covers like everything you need to know. And so I'm, as of this filming, I'm just about ready to launch these. And I built these to solve my own problem, but I'm confident it can solve yours as well. And it's really, really robust. And so if you would like to get more information about those, or be notified when I do launch those, I set up a page that provides all the info and kind of backstory on how I made these and what went into it and stuff. It's over at I should know my own URL. It's airplaneacademy.com/waitlist. And that'll give you all the information. And if you're watching this like way in the future, I'm gonna redirect that page to like the live page once they are available. So just, if you go to airplaneacademy.com/waitlist, it'll get you to the right place wherever I'm at in this process. But I think they're really, really helpful. I hope you'll just take a second, even if you need to like pause this video for a second, go check it out, come back and finish this video. I think you'll find it really interesting. More than anything, I hope it can help you. Another sneaky thing that can get you in trouble is not thinking before you react. Now for me, this is mainly played out with air traffic control, where they'll give you an instruction and you kind of just blindly comply with it. You're like, oh yeah, I'll do it. without actually thinking about what they're asking you to do first. So perfect example, one time I had about like 150 hours. I was a relatively new pilot. I was flying at Dallas Love Field where Southwest Airlines is headquartered. It's pretty busy space. And I was flying with my dad. He's a pilot. And at the time he had a 182. This is before I owned a 182. And so I was kind of nervous. He's letting me fly his airplane. And we're taxiing down and ground control is asking like, hey, are you gonna be ready at the end, like for takeoff? And I was just nervous and there's 737s all around me. And I was just like, I just responded, I was like, yeah, we'll be ready at the end. And my dad like elbowed me. He's like, you're not gonna do a run up, dude? I was like, oh shoot, yeah, I guess we need one of those. So then I like chimed back in. I'm like, oh, actually, ground, we'll need a few minutes for a run up. He's like, okay, that's fine. And he was cool about it. Like he was, it wasn't like, well, are you sure? You need to hurry up. He just wanted to know if we're gonna be down there for a second. But just out of nervousness and franticness, is that a word? I was being frantic. It was just like, oh yeah, I'll say yes. Just say yes, whatever. I don't want to be in trouble. And so, like, particularly when air traffic control asks you to do something, like, it's kind of like the checklist. Like, take half a second and think about what they just said. And you're like, do I really want to do that? Or what's my answer? You don't just have to blindly say yes. Like, think like a rational human, Charlie, telling myself to do this, and just think about what they say before you just blindly comply with it. The next one is that a lot of my mistakes or flustered moments have come as a result of not being ahead of the airplane. So what does that mean? Well, being ahead of the airplane just means anticipating the next step of the flight, so that way you're mentally prepared for it and you're not caught off guard. Now this is especially important in instrument flying because you can get task saturated really quickly, especially if you're playing catch up with the airplane. So while you're in cruise, it's a really helpful time to be briefing the approach. That way when you request the approach and they send you direct to one of the fixes on that approach, you're not like, what did they just say? Like you're kind of familiar with what they might give you. Or make sure you're briefing the missed approach procedure, so that way if you never pop out of the clouds, you're like, well, now what? It's like, sounds crazy. It's easy to do when you're task saturated and you're like, oh yeah, I haven't really thought about that yet. So and I'm not perfect, but I really do try to think about, okay, if there's an idle moment in the flight, let me just like review the next step or the next step. And is there anything I can do to kind of get configured for that or be thinking about that? Or at least that way we're not getting there and it's the first time I've thought about whatever the next phase of flight is. It can be really, really helpful. And in a similar way, try to know what to expect with air traffic control. Now, I screwed up ATC calls a lot learning here in the Dallas Class B, but really the more you fly, the more you'll realize that talking to air traffic control is like 98% the same stuff over and over and over. So it's hard at first, but then once you pick up on the trends, you'll be able to look out for whatever's next. That way you're ready for it. Like if they tell you to line up and wait on the runway, well, now you're expecting an imminent takeoff clearance. Or if you're departing under VFR flight following or IFR, right after takeoff, you're expecting them to hand you off to another frequency. There's gonna be a frequency change and stuff. So if you can just be thinking about that ahead of time, it'll get easier the more you fly. But just try to know what to expect. But then most importantly here with air traffic control, this will help get you to the point where you feel like you're fluent and comfortable, is that if you don't understand, just say so. Just communicate clearly. And my favorite example of this is that I heard of an American Airlines pilot one time telling center, I'm confused, I want to be unconfused. And I thought that was so humbling. I'm like, okay, well, if they can say that, if the airliners can say that, I can say that, surely. And so it'd be better to just tell them, I don't understand what you're asking me to do, or can you repeat that, or can you repeat that frequency, or just tell them you're a student pilot. Like the AIM even says that, to end your transmission, your first transmission with comment student pilot, and they'll be able to help you. And you can say that even if you're not a student pilot. There's nothing illegal about that. Then as far as actual flying mistakes, like making bad landings or not flying a maneuver the way you wanted, I would say that most, if not all, of flying well just comes down to this, and it comes down to energy management. So that same great instructor, Bob is his name, by the way. Hi, Bob, you know who you are. You're awesome, oh my gosh. But the same one that told me to become fluent in aviation also told me this. He goes, if you want to become better at landing or flying an airplane, you need to go watch the birds. Next time you're at a red light or a stop sign or you're sitting at the park, just take a minute to watch a bird that you see, because they are masters at managing their energy. With how much grace they fly in any wind, in any condition, and they can flip inverted and then go land on a power line or a branch and then come to a complete stop. Like they are complete masters of the air because they're phenomenal at energy management. So the question becomes, well, how do we become better at energy management. I think there's a few maneuvers that more than others can really help in this area. And first is slow flight. Now, most of us don't do much slow flight after just getting our license, but it's so useful because you're right on the edge of a stall and you get to feel how to manage the altitude, airspeed, and vertical speed. Like, all that is so important when you're on the edge there. And it'll make your approaches and your landings better. And then connected to that, then you can go practice short field spot landings. A lot of us practice short field landings, but adding like a particular spot that you're targeting to touch down at is really helpful. This is tremendous for energy management. A while back, I was training with TAC Aero, which is a really amazing flight school here in Texas. We were in a Top Cub, and we got to work up to landing on a sandbar, and it was just an absolute blast. But leading up to landing on that sandbar, we were practicing on a grass strip, practicing short field spot landings. And I kept floating past the landing point. Like, I was still landing reasonably short and stuff, but I wasn't hitting the spot we were targeting. And so it sounds obvious, but to touch down at a certain spot, you have to have your aiming point be actually short of that spot and then manage your energy to touch down where you want and not bounce. It's harder than it sounds. It sounds really easy as I'm describing it, but when it's happening, it's hard. And I think it's hard because we can get spoiled on long runways, but once you make yourself try to really land short, it's gonna force you to work on your energy management. Another super helpful maneuver is the power off 180. Now, you have to do this for your commercial check ride, but it's actually helpful to do anytime. There's lots of maneuvers on these check rides. You're like, when am I gonna use that? Like, is that actually helpful? This one is actually really helpful, and it's worth doing anytime. And it's basically a combination between a spot landing and a simulated engine failure. And so you'll go to power idle in the pattern, and then you'll have to target landing at a certain spot. So usually you'll use like the 1,000-foot markers as an example, and you're not allowed to land any bit before it. So the tolerance is -0, and then you have up to 200 feet past the start of the 1,000-foot markers to land. So you basically have a landing zone of about 200 feet, and you can't be at all before it. And it's so helpful. Like, go practice this in different winds and different runway widths and lengths, because the perception will be different and stuff. You'll get really good really quickly at managing your energy and understanding how much buoyancy the airplane has, particularly once you get down to the runway. You're like, oh no, I got like a couple hundred more feet to make it. Like, what can I do? What tools do I have available to me? Like, am I coming in too hot? What do I do about that? Like, just go practice 10 of those once a month or something. Like, you'll quickly get really good at this. So don't overlook that maneuver. It's a good one. So earlier in the video, I mentioned the flashcards that I've been working on for over a year. And in the video on the screen, I'm gonna provide more information as to how this can help you. If you're an aspiring pilot, student pilot, or you've been licensed for decades, like, these can absolutely help. Hope you'll take a second to check out that video that's on the screen right now, and I'll see you there.